Petra Melichar is with us and can hear us. Okay, so far we don't hear you. Is it a problem here or? Still don't have the sound, unfortunately.
Can ich hear you?
Draußen hört man sie.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's only the problem here in the room, and everyone can hear it on the Zoom.
Das scheint so zu sein, kann ich auch sagen.
Yes, Bamberg is also here listening.
Okay. Our problem, unfortunately, then still we can ask Dr. Petra Melichar to start. I would just have this opportunity to tell a little bit about her. She's a member of the Slavic Institute of Czech Academy of Science. She's a member of the Paleoslavonistic and Byzantology department, and her aim is mostly the Byzantine history, the question of holy women in the late medieval Byzantium, and the neighboring, especially Slavic countries, the religious conflicts in late Byzantium, and the relationships between Byzantines and Latins in the high and late Middle Ages. Her monograph, Empresses of Late Byzantium, Foreign Brides, Mediators, and Pious Women, emerged only recently. So, Dr. Melichar, the floor is yours. We hope we will start to hear you eventually even here. Thank you very much, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you will be able to hear me. I would like to ask the people online, can you see my presentation, please?
Now we can hear you and even see the presentation.
Yes. Oh, excellent.
Yes.
So,
great.
Then, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, before commencing my paper, I would like to salute you all and thank the organizers for their kind invitation to this extraordinary conference. In today's presentation, I would like to focus on two saintly 9th century princesses, Ludmila of Bohemia and Theodora of Byzantium, widows of rulers who brought up heirs to the throne and became saints of the Eastern and Western Church. Other than that, the cultures and circumstances they grew up in and lived under differed significantly, as did their path to sainthood. The juxtaposition of their stories is nevertheless useful, as it shows that while saints could create themselves, so to speak, by radical charity or asceticism, they could also be established by external agendas. It will be this latter aspect that I would like to explore in my paper. As you are all well acquainted with what the various preserved sources have to say about the life of Saint Ludmila, let me briefly introduce Saint Theodora and the circumstances of her life and rule. Theodora's story partly takes place in the period of the iconoclast controversy in Byzantium. This movement, which took place in the 8th and 9th century, was instigated by the ruling elites and the army, who denied the holiness of sacred images, icons, and rejected their veneration. While there were socio-economic reasons in the background, modern scholars agree that concerns for salvation stood at the forefront of the iconoclast reaction. In order to suppress what they perceived as idolatry, iconoclast emperors and their officials ordered destruction of icons, churches, and manuscripts. In a number of cases also commanded torture and even murders of the iconophile believers. Iconophily was especially prominent among the imperial women, who allegedly had a very close relationship to icons. A century before, Theodora, for example, Empress Irene, sought to reverse the iconoclast policies of her husband, Constantine V. It was in this time of civil strife, distrust, violence, and fear that the future saint, Theodora, was born in Abyssa in Paphlagonia, probably around the year 815. Paphlagonia, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but
we can see it.
It's this northern part of Asia Minor. She was the daughter of an army officer Marinos and Theoctis Florina, and had several siblings, two of whom played an important role in her later life. In May 830, Empress Euphrosine organized a bridal show for her stepson, Emperor Theophilos, and for this purpose sent our legate to bring the most beautiful women of the empire to Constantinople. It is possible that the empress also secretly instructed her emissaries to prefer girls from iconophile families, because the sources reveal that at least two of the candidates shared the religious views of the senior empress. Theodora emerged victorious from the competition and married Theophilos on June 5, 830. They had 2 sons and 5 daughters. Early in 842, Theophilos contracted dysentery and died. The empress took over the regency for her son Michael III, whom you will know probably as the agency of Přetislav's mission of 863. Michael III was then 2 years old. Theodora's reign seems to have been overall a calm and stable season of Byzantine history. In March 843, Theodora and her chief official, Theoctistos, reversed the iconoclast policy, deposed Patriarch John the Grammarian, and elected Methodius in his place, conclusively established icon veneration as an official doctrine of the Eastern Church. The stability inaugurated by Theodora's regency unfortunately did not last. In November 855, the powerful eunuch Theoctistos, Theodora's closest collaborator, was murdered by the empress's brother Bardas, backed by her son Michael and her sister. In the following year, Theodora was formally deposed as empress, while her daughters were sent to the monastery where she was later forced to join them. After several years, the ex-empress was recalled to the court, but only to witness further disasters and destruction of her family. Her brother Bardas was murdered in 866 by the new favorite of her son, Basil. In the following year, Basil murdered also Michael III and became emperor in his stead. The last time the chronicles mention Theodora, she is weeping along with her daughters over the dead body of Michael, covered only with a horse blanket. The deposed empress died sometime later and was buried in the monastery of Dagastria. If sainthood would be earned by suffering, she would certainly have been a deserving candidate. Looking at the vitas and actions of Ludmila and Theodora, neither distinguished herself by outstanding acts of charity in course of her life or by exceptional healing properties of her relics. Neither proved a typical runner for popular veneration in the style of great saintly princesses. So Ludmila does not resemble Elizabeth of Thuringen, who on the death of her husband founded a hospital in which personally and in great poverty and discomfort tended the sick until she herself fell ill and died. Theodora, for her part, is not known to have built churches like St. Helene, the mother of Emperor Constantine, or to have become a nun, built convents, and led an ascetic life like St. Theodora of Arta. While Ludmila was one of the first converts in Bohemia who supported the religious policy of her husband and her sons, and brought up her grandsons, one of whom became the main patron saint of the Czech lands, these facts receive only a cursory mention in her legends. Her claim to official sainthood mostly rested on her faith, generosity to the poor, though described in rather general terms, support, again rather vague, of priests, the brutal death instigated by her allegedly pagan daughter-in-law, and several miracles. Ludmila's martyr death is moreover called into question by Drahomira's strong political motivations in this matter. Theodora's sanctity, on the other hand, mainly hinges on the fact that she reversed, and thus de facto terminated, the iconoclast policy of the Byzantine emperors. This event is described in several different documents which tend to stress the role of different interest groups and which give rather little credit to Theodora herself. Considering these somewhat weak legends, we must inquire into other grounds for sanctification of these princesses. The reasons behind Ludmila's halo illustrate the interest and power of the Přemysly dynasty. Ludmila represents the motivations of a dynasty which needed to establish itself in the Central European space, not only by factual power, but also by presenting its members as pious individuals, relatives of saints and martyrs, ruling from the grace of God. Their actions mirrored similar efforts of the neighboring rulers who likewise cherished their saintly and martyred mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and great-aunts as guarantors of the legitimacy of their power. The princess's relics were entrusted to the Benedictine nunnery of St. George in Prague to care for and promote her cult. Ludmila, a devoted Christian dying a violent death, ordered by her pagan daughter-in-law, was rather easily, if only gradually, squeezed into the mold of a medieval saint. While the cult of St. Ludmila was promoted by the ruling elites, Theodora's case reflects the influence and power of the Eastern Church, which was able to counter even the conflicting dynastic ideologies of the Macedonian dynasty. The establishing of Theodora as a saint was, in fact, not an easy matter in the decades following her death. When her son was murdered in September 867, the throne and power were seized by the Macedonians, which eventually turned out to be the most popular dynasty of the Byzantine Empire. Basil I naturally wished to denigrate the memory of his predecessors in order to legitimize his own ascent to power. While Byzantine chronicles present relatively numerous details about the life and actions of the empress, following the death of her son, there is no information about her life except that her remains were buried in the monastery of Sagastria. This information signals that Theodora was denied a festive burial in the imperial mausoleum next to her husband Theophilos. As Linda Garland, in her study on early and middle Byzantine empresses noted, the empress was presented negatively by a whole generation of historians who denigrated both her actions and her character. In contrast to Ludmila, whose vita was rewritten in a number of legends and homilies, Theodora's life is captured by a single vita written shortly after her death, in which the empress does not even play a central role. Although the empress took the decisive step to re-establish the veneration of icons, only 3 icons of herself have been preserved. I found one just to illustrate. Finally, her relics were hidden away in a little-known convent, which prevented the empress from exhibiting healing powers and attracting public veneration. Initially proscribed by the ruling dynasty, then Theodora thus had little hope that she would enjoy the same fame and popularity as her Bohemian colleague. Grateful for her intervention in 843, the Church nevertheless came to her rescue. By instituting the Feast of Orthodoxy on the first Sunday of the Great Lent, it created a solid basis for Theodora's memory, and her name has been remembered annually by Orthodox believers ever since. Before I conclude my paper, I would like to point out an interesting parallel which figures in the lives of both princesses and which features their relationship to political power. While Ludmila seems to have supported the rule of her male relatives, in Fuit in Provincia Bohemorum, she meekly passes her power onto her daughter-in-law with the following words: I do not desire to rule and do not wish to have even the least part of your power. On the contrary, I request that you allow me to serve God until the end of my days, end quote. Similarly, Theodora, after she had been deposed as empress by her son and brother, speaks to her son Michael, I quote, Child of mine and gift of God, now that I am free from the responsibility of providing for the people, I shall be content to keep to myself praying for you and my other children, end quote. This loose relationship to power is typical of legends of female rulers, which sometimes completely omit mentions of the saintly ruler's political activities, otherwise copiously witnessed by the chronicles. It is the case also with our two princesses. Ludmila's vita do not associate the saint with any direct role or influence on government, even though it is likely that after the death of her husband and each of her sons, she helped stabilize the new regime. The life of Theodora, likewise, does not mention almost anything about her regency, except for the restoration of icon veneration, which is related in extremely concise terms, even though other sources present Theodora as an accomplished politician well capable of governing the empire. In conclusion, the stories of the 9th century princesses Ludmila and Theodora reveal the precarious circumstances of princely and imperial widows left in position of power. Ludmila was murdered at the command of her daughter-in-law. Theodora was demoted from her imperial position by her son and later died in oblivion under the rule of a new dynasty. And yet, the need of the state and the gratitude of the church effected a happy end to their stories. Theodora received a halo, while Ludmila, heading the Collegium of the Czech Saints, became together with Wenceslas the patron saint of the Bohemian lands. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Melichar, for your contribution. It was a really striking and inspiring similarity between these two faiths. Before we maybe find somebody to ask about the contribution, let me just note that maybe the similarity could go even further if we inspire ourselves by the ideas of Professor Petr Kubín, that actually even the cult of Saint Ludmila was reinstituted and only to be found later according to his vision of the development of the cult. Of course, this is not the only way how it is viewed now. So my question is if we have any questions here in the hall or online. And maybe if it's still not the time that somebody wishes to raise the hand, maybe I will ask myself, connecting with my own contribution. What was the situation about controlling the imperial properties and imperial monies by the empresses and empresses dowages? Did they have some sort of guaranteed access to the properties, to the money, or was it some sort of special institution in Byzantium of that time, if I may ask?
You can, of course, ask. I will try to answer the question. This is, I did not specialize on this area, but I have been reading, of course, about Theodora recently. And it's very interesting that she came from rather humble origins, but it seems that she was a very good economist. And it seems that under her rule, under the 14 years which she was ruling Byzantium as governor for her son, she actually gathered quite a bit of capital. And there is, in the chronicles, there is this one story about her that that one day the emperor and empress were looking out of the palace and there was a beautiful ship coming into the harbor. And the emperor asked whose ship it was. And he found out it was actually the ship of the empress, who was enterprising on her own and making money, and got very angry with her because this was, of course, something that an empress was not supposed to do. And he had the ship completely destroyed. But yes, I think that the empress, if she was able to hold on to power and to money, we also see it in late Byzantium, where I know a little bit more about it. And especially if she was a regent, she was able to control effectively the resources of the empire.
Okay, thank you very much. Another attempt to give word to the online and present audience. And if it's not, we'll once again thank you, Dr. Melichar, for your contribution.